I found out who my family really was 10 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. And I've never told anyone the full story until now. My name is Georgia Wren. I'm 32. And what happened on what should have been the happiest day of my life still catches in my throat when I think about it. Not because it was tragic in the way people expect. Because it was the moment everything finally made sense. It was my wedding day, the second Saturday of June. We'd rented out an old vineyard just outside the city, the kind of place with fairy lights strung through the trellises and jasmine climbing every post. I'd spent almost 16 months on that day, obsessing over every detail nobody else would ever notice. The exact shade of the table linens, the placement of every candle, the order of the playlist during cocktail hour. I threw everything I had into it, because I genuinely believed it was the start of the life I'd fought so hard to build for myself. His name was Desmond. Desmond Cole. We'd been together 3.5 years, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I could actually exhale around someone. He was calm, in a way that steadied me. He was honest, sometimes bluntly so, and he remembered things about me that I hadn't even realized mattered to me. Not because he was performing for anyone. Because paying attention was just who he was. That's what I loved most about him, if I'm being honest. About 10 minutes before I was due to walk out, my best friend Priya came into the bridal suite and shut the door behind her, so quietly it scared me more than if she'd slammed it. Her face had gone completely white. Not the nervous kind of white. The kind that tells you something is actually wrong. She stood there for a second, like she was searching for the right words. And then she just said them, straight out. Georgia. You cannot go out there right now. At first, I laughed. I thought maybe a centerpiece had tipped over, or someone had spilled wine on the runner, something small and fixable. But her face didn't move an inch. She stepped closer and dropped her voice even lower. Your parents are up at the altar. Both of them. And your brother's with them. Something's wrong. I can feel it. I didn't understand, so I walked to the door myself and cracked it open, just enough to see through. And what I saw knocked the breath straight out of my chest. My father was standing at the front of the ceremony space, holding a microphone. Not seated in the front row, where a proud father belonged. My mother stood next to him, clutching a folded piece of paper against her chest, like she was bracing to read a statement. And my younger brother, Callum, stood just off to their side, wearing an expression I can only describe as pleased with himself. Not worried. Not sad. Pleased, like he'd been waiting years for exactly this moment to arrive. The guests were already seated, and I could see the confusion rippling through the rows, people leaning toward each other, whispering. Desmond was standing at the end of the aisle near the officiant, and even from that distance, I could see how tense his shoulders had gotten. He already sensed something was off. My family had planned an ambush, at my own wedding, in front of every single person I'd ever let into my life. And they'd decided, without once asking me, that this was the moment to unload whatever they'd been carrying. The microphone. The letter. The way they were standing. None of it was spontaneous. It had all been arranged in advance. I stepped back from the door, and my hands were completely steady, which honestly surprised me more than anything else that day. Priya was watching my face like she expected me to collapse right there on the spot. But I didn't. Something inside me went very still. And it wasn't the stillness of panic, it was clarity. Sharp and sudden. Because what my family had no way of knowing, was that Desmond already knew everything. Every secret they thought they were about to detonate in front of 200 guests, Every piece of my past they assumed would blow this wedding apart, I had already handed to him myself, months earlier, sitting across our kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a coffee mug gone cold. I'd told him all of it. And he'd simply looked at me and said, "None of that changes how I feel about you." My family had shown up prepared to deliver a bombshell. What they were about to walk into was something they hadn't accounted for at all. I smoothed down the front of my dress, took one slow breath, and opened the door. I walked out of that suite with my chin level and my steps deliberate. And the second the guests spotted me at the entrance to the garden, the whole place went silent. The string trio cut off mid-phrase. Every head turned toward me. And my father, microphone already halfway to his mouth, froze the instant he saw my face. I wasn't crying. I wasn't hesitating. I was walking straight toward them. I watched the confusion land on my mother's face first. She'd expected me to walk out blind, unaware, completely blindsided in front of everyone I cared about. That had been the entire point of the setup. The microphone, the letter, where they'd positioned themselves, all of it built around the assumption that I'd be caught off guard and fall apart publicly, that the wedding would crumble under whatever they were about to announce. But I'd already seen them through that crack in the door. And more than that, I'd known something like this was coming, for a lot longer than any of them realized. I walked the entire length of that aisle. But not to my place beside Desmond. I walked straight up to my father. I stood right in front of him, held out my hand, palm up, and waited. He looked down at my hand, then up at my face, and after a long moment, he set the microphone into my palm. The garden went completely quiet. I turned to face everyone seated in those white folding chairs, every one of them someone who actually mattered to me. Friends who'd flown in. Co-workers. People who'd driven hours just to be there. They deserved the truth. So I gave it to them straight. I told them my family had come there that day intending to stop the wedding. That they'd shown up with a microphone and a letter and a plan, and that pretending it didn't hurt would be a lie, because it did. And it probably would for a long time. Then I paused, and told everyone something they needed to hear. Whatever my family had come to say. Desmond already knew. I'd told him myself every part of it, because that's what you do when you love someone and you actually want to build a life with them. You don't hide. You don't perform. You sit across from them and tell them the truth, and let them choose you anyway. I turned and found Desmond's eyes. He was looking back at me with the same steady, grounded expression he always wore, and he gave me one small nod. That was all I needed. I turned back toward my family. My mother had lowered the letter to her side. My brother's smug little smile had faded into something I couldn't quite name anymore. My father stood frozen. I spoke to them directly, and I kept my voice level, because I meant every word and didn't need to raise it to be heard. I told them I understood they were scared for me, that in whatever twisted way they'd convinced themselves of, they believed this was protection. But I told them they'd chosen to do this in front of 200 people, without a single phone call beforehand, without one private conversation, without giving me the basic dignity of hearing it from them alone first. And that told me everything about what this was actually about. I told them that somewhere underneath it, all three of them already knew exactly what I meant. My mother opened her mouth like she wanted to respond, then closed it again without a word. I handed the microphone back to my father, smoothed my dress one last time, and walked over to where Desmond was standing. I took his hand, looked at our officiant, and said, "Let's do this." The ceremony that followed was the most honest 20 minutes of my entire life. Desmond's voice never wavered once during his vows. When I said mine, I meant every single word, all the way down. And when we finally turned to face our guests, most of them were already on their feet, not out of politeness, but because they'd just witnessed something that no amount of applause could really capture. My family left before the reception even started. I watched them go from across the vineyard. I didn't run after them. I stood there next to my husband, and watched them walk away. And what hit me in that moment wasn't anger, and it wasn't relief. It was grief. Real grief, for the version of that day I used to picture, the one where they sat in the front row crying happy tears and hugged me tight at the end of the aisle. That version never happened. But the one that did happen was still mine. And I got to keep it. Desmond and I danced until the lights came up and the staff started folding chairs. Priya cried through nearly the entire reception. The food was incredible. Somebody's toast got the whole room laughing so hard that 2 people knocked their glasses over at the same time. It was messy and warm and completely, unmistakably real. If there's one thing I've taken from that day that I want to pass along to anyone sitting with their own version of this story, it's this. People who love you without conditions show it to you quietly, in private, not as a performance staged for an audience. And the people who would stand at your altar holding a microphone, aren't trying to save you from anything. They're trying to hold on to control of you. And there's a real difference between the two. Once you feel that difference in your bones, you'll know exactly what to do with it. I did. And I've never once looked back. If this story stirred something in you, you're exactly who this channel is made for. Hit subscribe right now, because every week we're bringing you more real stories like this one, stories about the moments people chose themselves instead of shrinking. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. And I'll see you in the next one.